This is CBC Vancouver News.
And something to do with cooking, the vessel caught fire.
A man is rushed to hospital after fire erupts on several boats in False Creek.
Right now, I feel we're kind of pushed to the limit.
Some BC farmers struggle to hold on as the province endures a massive drought. When might we get some rain? And from rides to business licenses to pets, it could cost you more to live and work in Vancouver as the city considers fee hikes. Good evening, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. One person has been rushed to hospital with severe burns after fire erupted on at least 2 boats in Vancouver's False Creek tonight. Liam Britton has more on the scary scene on the water.
Just off the Yaletown shore, billowing black smoke and dark red flames fly up from a pair of anchored boats, a sailboat and a pleasure craft. Fire crews doused those vessels and a third using their fireboats. The department says one man on the pleasure craft was rushed to Vancouver General Hospital, severely burned but in stable condition.
I can tell you that the fire does appear to be accidental at this time.
Assistant Fire Chief Ken Gemmell says the man was cooking when the fire broke out.
He's getting some burn treatment right now, but as soon as he gets out of that, our fire investigation will commence and hopefully we'll get to the bottom of it.
Gemmell says a woman was on board the sailboat. She was shaken up but made it to shore unhurt. Gemmell adds it's not legal for boats to be anchored in False Creek, but enforcing those rules is a jurisdictional issue. He says the fire-scorched boats aren't a threat to the environment or navigation. They aren't likely to sink, and it will be up to the owners to move them. Liam Britton, CBC News, Vancouver.
Yesterday, BC's Emergency Preparedness Minister warned we are facing drought conditions never before seen in this province. With strict water restrictions in place in many parts, some farmers are struggling to make ends meet. Yasmin Gandam has their story.
I haven't seen it like this. This is the driest he's ever seen in 80 years of farming.
Matthew Lady runs Brookfield Dairy Farm in Maple Ridge. The farm has been in his family since 1879, but if the province does not see enough rain, he is worried he won't be able to keep it up.
We're learning to adapt as we go, but there's only so far we can push things. And right now I feel we're kind of pushed to the limit. You can see the grass is a bit ground and dry. They're happy to be out here eating.
Lady says farmers are all competing for the limited stock of hay right now, resorting to buying from across the border. Governments are calling the conditions catastrophic, unlike anything that's been seen before. The federal minister of emergency preparedness says work is being done to make sure policies are in place to support those hit hard by the ongoing drought.
Looking at the mitigation and the adaptation work. So that's an area that we will work together on this. The wider drought issue, I think, is going to have to take a look at a much wider issue when it comes to what type of new systems are going to be needed in place, what type of disaster that might also fall, and what type of consultations will be needed.
But this climate change expert says conditions aren't changing anytime soon.
The drought conditions this fall is more likely to actually continue all the way to mid-spring. And the reason being, there will be precipitation, but most of it falls mid to high elevation in the form of snow.
The province has seen sustained higher than average temperatures and low rainfall this year, leading to the worst wildfire season on record. While too much rain too quickly could cause the catastrophic flooding seen in winter of 2021, too little could extend the drought into the new year.
That wildfire has a double whammy, an effect on droughts because it exacerbates the droughts because the landscape is actually now water repellent. The flood level that we used to experience once every 100 years, we're now experiencing them more frequently.
One step we would look to in the future was adding irrigation equipment.
For now, the only thing farmers like Lady can do is hope for some rain and relief. Yasmin Gandam, CBC News, Maple Ridge.
The Fraser Valley Regional District says a wildfire near Lytton has destroyed 27 structures. The Kokipi Creek blaze has been out of control along Highway 1 since midsummer. The 27 structures include 6 homes. The others are recreational properties and service buildings. The fire was discovered on July 8th and is believed to have been ignited by lightning. It led to evacuation alerts and orders, including in the village of Lytton, which itself burned to the ground 2 years ago. In West Kelowna, meanwhile, a warning from the regional district for people to stay out of evacuation areas. The district says people are trying to sneak in by boat and along forestry roads into fire zones. Police checkpoints and patrols are in place, and people caught illegally in the area could be fined more than $1,000. The evacuation order is in place until tomorrow, but it could be extended. This year's wildfire season in Canada could last into late fall or early winter. That's the grim forecast today from Natural Resources Canada.
Indeed, despite the arrival of cooler night temperatures and decreases in lightning activity in the fall, ongoing warm and dry weather may contribute to new fire starts, and there remains a likelihood that some existing fires may continue to be active.
Wilkinson also announced $65 million in federal funding for wildfire equipment and other supports. It's the first payment from a wildfire fund available to all provinces and territories. Ottawa plans to provide almost $260 million through to 2027. Police say the massive explosion in downtown Prince George that sent 3 people to hospital last month was from copper pipe thieves. RCMP says several people broke into an abandoned restaurant on August 2nd. They claim there was evidence the copper pipe theft caused damage to a natural gas line. That gas built up inside the building and was eventually ignited, causing the ground-shaking blast. The building was leveled and debris was scattered for blocks. Police say the thieves were unaware of the gas buildup inside. No one has been arrested. The City of Vancouver is considering some steep new fee hikes for things like ride-hailing, parking permits, and business licenses, essentially adding to the already high cost for people who live and work in the city. Justin McElroy is on the story for us. Justin, a rather wide range of hikes. Break it down for us.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, Dan, and it comes because City Council said that they wanted next year to try and limit the property tax increases, which have been going up from 2%, 3% to 5% to 7%. Last year, more than 10%. So they asked staff to come up with some ideas of ways they could raise revenues outside of property taxes, which is how most of the budget was funded. And these are some of the specific proposals that staff want them to consider for next year. So one, the short-term rental license fee. So if you have an Airbnb property, it would go from $109 for the annual license to $450, a 25% increase for places where it's on-street parking permits, a regular business license fee going from $171 to $250, and doubling that 30-cent ride-hailing fee. So every time you take an Uber or Lyft right now, 30 cents is added to the bill. It would be 45 cents next year, 60 cents the year after that. There's also a proposed $12 increase for dog license as well, from $49 to $61, as well as a lot of different things. Staff say that would basically mean 1.4% property tax increases would be removed for next year, and they're going to go through all of this next week. And again, a lot of interesting trade-offs in this proposal.
So the report is before council next week. How likely is it that these will be approved?
You know, it's interesting. Some of these things may get passed. Some of them may not. It's not like the exact vote is going to happen. A lot of it's going to be put forward for future budget conversations. But a lot of this is a philosophic conversation on how the city should fund itself. Should it be through property taxes, which go for people that own their properties, or should it be more distributed for different fees that all sorts of people use at the end of the day? We spoke to 2 councillors about the conversation that they're going to have next week, and it's going to be an interesting ideological discussion.
The annual surveys that go out to residents around 2024 budget consistently showed an overwhelming result in the positive, that people would prefer an increase in fees, user fees, that type of thing, over increase in property taxes. So this is the first time that we're really seeing a more targeted and focused approach to that.
It's a tough question. User fees tend to be more regressive than property taxes as a form of generating the funds to pay for our shared priorities. And it always needs to be a bit of a balance.
But everyone's balance is a little bit different. $2 billion is the annual budget for the city. Governing and figuring out how to pay for all of that is difficult. We'll see how those conversations go next week.
Someone will pay. Justin McElroy, thanks very much.
Thanks, Dan.
For 80 years, the pier at Jericho Beach has been a popular vantage point to take in views of Burrard Inlet, English Bay as well. But the Vancouver Park Board says it's time to tear it down. The pier has been closed since early last year because of a significant storm damage. But now park staff have published a report saying it would cost too much to repair or replace it. The report says it's at the end of its service life and it risks more storm damage in the future because of climate change. How wildfires spread and how much do they destroy? We have a very close look right after this. And thank you for watching our commercial-free live stream tonight. Yellowknife has been essentially shut down for 3 weeks after the town was evacuated because of wildfires. Now thousands of people are heading home. But as Richard Gleason reports, many do not know what's going to be available when they get there.
It's going to take some time before things are fully back up and running. Some essential workers, like healthcare workers and daycare workers, are already back, but most workers won't be allowed back in until noon tomorrow. Here's a rundown of some of the services that will be available tomorrow. Over at Stanton Hospital, the emergency department will be at almost normal capacity, but patients needing more complicated emergency care that would normally get that care here will be medevaced to southern hospitals after being stabilized. The intensive care, extended care, and psychiatric units will remain closed. The health department is telling evacuees who have medical travel appointments in Alberta before September 11th to not return home. I asked what support will be available for those folks, but have not got a response yet. Sutherland's Drugs has remained open through the evacuation. Shoppers Drug Mart and the Medicine Shop Pharmacy on Old Airport Road are also open with limited hours. Both the Co-op grocery store and the Uptown Independent Grocer store will be open. The Co-op is open from 8 a.m. till 7 p.m. and the Uptown Independent is open from noon until 8 p.m. The Co-op Gas Bar is open from 8 a.m. until 6 p.m. The chair of the Yellowknife Daycare Association says they're looking at being up and running by Monday, the same day students are now scheduled to return to school. Anyone hoping to go to the liquor store to get some cold beer after the long drive, you're out of luck. The manager of both liquor stores says they will not be open tomorrow, though they will try to open before the weekend. Richard Gleason, CBC News, Yellowknife. From Lytton to Lahaina to West Kelowna, we've seen a rising number of wildfires that travel so fast, the people in their path have little warning and just moments to flee.
Our Michelle Gasub has been looking into the conditions that lead to the most aggressive wildfire behavior and what we can do to prevent them.
The McDougall Creek fire that destroyed homes in West Kelowna seemed to come out of nowhere, forcing thousands to evacuate. It grew about 20 kilometers in just 12 hours. That's one of the fastest growing wildfires in BC's history. We've seen other destructive fires like this one that move with such speed, people had no choice but to flee. From Lytton, BC to Lahaina on Maui. So why do some fires go from spark to inferno so fast, and why do they seem to be getting worse? The McDougall Creek wildfire here in West Kelowna started as a spot fire. It was first discovered August 15th. In over a 24-hour period, it grew from 64 hectares to 68 square kilometers. The night of August 17th, people watched in horror as the fire barreled down the hill towards them, moving at incredible speeds.
When I say extreme, what it means is that they are moving faster than we can effectively put firefighting resources on them.
Every fire behaves differently, but there are specific conditions that determine how quickly they move and grow.
So when we talk about fire and fire behavior, we always talk about triangles. So topography, fuels, and weather. And so there's combinations of topography, fuels, and weather that kind of lead to sometimes to aggressive fire behavior.
Let's start with perhaps the most important factor in all these fires: weather and often powerful winds. In West Kelowna, wind gusts pushed the fire aggressively towards town, even causing it to jump Lake Okanagan.
You could see it moving quite quickly, and then when it started coming down the hill, I mean, with the winds kind of pushing it, that's what sort of allowed it to come down. But we saw aggressive fire behavior, and this is where, the fire itself starts to exhibit some influence on what you're seeing. When a fire starts to generate a lot of energy and a lot of heat, it's actually going to generate wind that pulls the fire along. We had really, really high wind speeds that day, so 50 to 70 kilometers an hour or higher with gusts. And when you get these large, aggressive fires with these big convective columns, what's happening is you have a lot of ember transport and the transport of other materials like pine cones, branches, twigs, other sorts of materials that are picked up by that fire into the smoke column or in the wind and then carried long distances. And so what we saw in Kelowna on August 17th with those wind speeds was ember transport across the lake, which is maybe a kilometer or two wide where it jumped the lake. And so those embers and those materials got into the fuels on the other side of the lake and started the fires that we saw in Lake Country and on the Kelowna side versus West Kelowna.
We now know that in Lahaina, the fire that destroyed the town was exacerbated by strong easterly trade winds whipped up by Hurricane Dora. That fire grew by a mile a minute. That's as fast as a car driving on a highway.
Wind is everything. It's really that last piece of the puzzle because it fuels oxygen to the fire. So just the same way as if you had a campfire and you're getting down to blow on the embers to really start that fire, the wind acts as that really driving force behind fires.
Next up in our fire triangle is topography. Fires can move very fast uphill. Heat rises, preheating fuels that are further up on a slope, igniting them quickly once the fire reaches them.
Fires really like to move up steep slopes, but in the case of the West Kelowna wildfires, we saw the fire actually moving downslope, and I think that really had to do from the winds pushing at that fire's back down the slope. But we also were experiencing some issues of probably rolling debris and embers rolling down that slope and creating small spot fires underneath, which were then burning up and connecting to that main fire source.
Topography played a huge role in the destruction of Lytton. The village sits inside a canyon. The day of the fires, temperatures soared to 49.5 degrees Celsius. High winds raced down into Lytton, acting like a blowtorch on the landscape. All it took was a spark for almost the entire village to go up in flames.
It's coming this way, fast! Let's get out of here.
The Lytton fire station camera caught one last image of the fire heading into town just before a majority of the village was destroyed. The last piece of the fire triangle is fuel. Lytton, Lahaina, and West Kelowna all experienced sustained droughts before these fires struck. So there was lots of dry material from trees to shrubs, grass, and pine cones ready to burn. One thing we can control is the amount of available fuel. Doing more prescribed burns can get rid of dry material that can burn.
So our treatments need to be on the scale of the fires that we're seeing. So if we're seeing 5,000 hectare fires, and some of our treatments should be 5,000 hectares or more. So it's that pattern that we need to create across the landscape, and we just need to do a lot more of it. And we don't have forever. The way things are changing quite rapidly with climate change and the creation of more fuels and the accumulation of more fuels is we have a limited window.
The people who have fought and studied fires worry these kinds of aggressive wildfires are becoming more severe and more frequent because our climate is changing. When topography, fuel, and weather come together, fires can get so dangerous, even firefighters may be forced to retreat.
To be honest, sometimes it just becomes too dangerous to actually have personnel on that type of fire where you're seeing that kind of fire behavior. And as a wildland firefighter, those are the ones where we start talking about making sure you have an escape route, making sure you have a way to get out of the fire into a safety zone in case you had to get away from that fire. When I was a wildland firefighter, it seems like fires are different. They're more aggressive, and it's becoming a more dangerous sort of thing sometimes to action some of these fires. And so I think there's an urgency with that if we're going to live with these type of fires on the landscape, how do we do that?
The McDougall Creek fire destroyed or damaged almost 170 structures. In Lytton, an entire village was lost and 2 elderly people died. In Lahaina, the death toll is 115 people, and many more are still missing. Fast-moving fires are dangerous to the people who live on these landscapes. As our climate changes and as fires like these become more common, the ways we mitigate and fight them will have to adapt too.
The CBC's Michelle Gassoub reporting from West Kelowna. And if you'd like to track climate change, both here in Vancouver and around the world, you can go to our climate dashboard. That's at cbc.ca/climate. That was sunset this evening over Mount Seymour's Mystery Peak. Darius Madavi will have your BC-wide forecast next and a closer look at BC's drought this year compared to last. You'll want to see this.
It's a big coffee table book. Someone said it's so heavy you could probably just put 4 legs on it. The West Coast heavies celebrated between the covers include Jack Diamond of horse racing fame, J.V. Klein, who once ruled the Macmillan-Bloedel Forest Products empire, and even artist Tony Onley, whose Rolls-Royce and planes have made him more famous than his paintings.
What I'm interested in are people who make decisions that affect other people. In other words, people who have power and influence beyond their companies or their families or their practices. So what this book really does is sum up Canadian society in terms of its decision makers.
So let's talk about some of the people from Vancouver who we might recognize in the book. Peter Brown.
Well, Peter Brown started out as a fly-by-night operator on the Vancouver Stock Exchange, and now he's a national figure. You know, he is doing more underwriting than anybody in Toronto, and he's a very important man in Canadian finance.
Now, in one part of the book, you talk about dynasties, the Bronfmans, the Bassets, but you also talk about the Woodwards.
Well, certainly, the Woodwards are an important Canadian family, and Chunky is a man who I think inspires people not just by what he owns, but by his lifestyle.
Okay, how about Jimmy Pattison?
Well, Jimmy, again, you know, that's an example of somebody who was once a used car dealer, and now he's an important figure in Canadian finance. His company, which he owns entirely himself, is the 103rd largest company in Canada. He survived the recession. He's now a banker in Switzerland, the Cayman Islands.
Interesting to note that none of the local rich and powerful enshrined in Newman's new book braved the rain to show up at the launching party. But it did attract observers of the upper crust social scene.
How does the West Coast establishment stack up against the East Coast establishment?
Somewhat nouveau, but with the Bellsbergs and
Peter Brown and people like that, certainly financially we're making a nice stab at it, and we may be nouveau, but we know how to spend it, we know how to have fun at it in a more laid-back, semi-California way than they do in the East. I think we're having fun with our money out here.
De Brett's Peerage has been a prime reference on the British aristocracy for more than 200 years. Peter Newman has been writing about the Canadian establishment for about a decade. Now, you might think there's a little bit of the gilding of the lily here with this book, until you read Peter Newman's opening quote. When a nation's elite is less than 3 generations removed from steerage, it can't afford too many pretensions. It's in that spirit that this book was written. Are we to take this as seriously as De Brett's Peerage?
I hope not. No, De Brett's Peerage is a standard reference book. It's very dry. It just lists, you know, the latest son or daughter is of some earl or baron. This is a fun book. This is People magazine hardcovers.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
September is Literacy Month. Have fun and support the cause by joining CBC Vancouver's Dan Burritt at Dakota's Team Trivia Challenge on September 27th. For tickets, register at dakota.ca. And never miss a special programming series, event, or contest. Subscribe to CBC Vancouver's e-newsletter at cbc.ca/Vancouver inbox and keep connected with us.
The weather update is brought to you by Direct Buy Furnace. To cool and clean the air in your home, call Direct Buy Furnace. Installing Trane, the most reliable heating and cooling brand.
Time for our BC-wide weather forecast with science and climate specialist Darius Mahdavi. And we go back to our top story. Darius, drought. What's the situation across the province?
Drought. Well, we're looking pretty similar to last week. You can see we haven't had many changes. The only thing is we've had one downgrade from a level 5 to a level 4. But to be honest, I wouldn't read too much into it. We're basically in the same situation that we were as of the last update last week. I want to compare this to where we were at this time last year. So as we've talked about before, we were heading into a really historic drought situation. And I feel like I use that word a lot, but here it's really, really accurate. Now, we were around this time, we were pretty decent around the province. This is quite unusual for heading into, or quite usual for the beginning of fall, but unusual for later on. And if we look at the peak of that drought situation last fall, we were in a better place at the peak of that really historic event than we are currently. And so if we don't see rain come up and help us bring our drought levels back down, we're going to be in a much worse spot come the end of October. Now, is that going to happen? Let's talk short range first. We don't have much rain in the forecast. Over the next 24 hours or so, just a little bit for Haida Gwaii and a little bit sneaking into the Kootenays. But as we head later into the week, you can see or at the beginning of the weekend, we are bone dry across the province. But if you look at that band of moisture out in the Pacific, you can see it make its way over, coating the island by Sunday, and then early Monday morning, it might just make its way to Vancouver and Victoria, but likely not going to make its way to much of the interior. We're looking pretty dry for the near future for the interior, and that's not a great sign of things to come, but it's also not representative. At this time last year, we were forecasted to have a pretty reasonable amount of precipitation over the fall in the southern and central parts of BC and a higher than average amount of rainfall in the north. But what we ended up seeing was drought conditions and a lack of rainfall at incredible levels across the province. And so I don't want to read too much into what's forecasted for the future, but we are forecasted, according to ECCC, for a dry fall for the south. So keep in mind that situation, but take it with a grain of salt. That being said, tomorrow we have temperatures come up a little bit in the south, and this will be the story through most of the weekend for the southern interior. For Saturday will be our hottest day here on the coast, and then temperatures come back down Sunday as we see the chance of that rain come in. In terms of smoke, mostly just for the central BC, a little bit of an increase for the Kelowna area. in terms of our weather across the province. We see that real clearing pattern as we get a lot of sun across the province, and that's what we see here in Vancouver as well. Friday and Saturday, I'd recommend getting outside and getting outdoors. That's what I'll be doing for sure, because we have some really nice weather. Sunday, just a chance of showers overnight, but should still be pretty nice. So a great weekend to get back into the swing of things.
Okay, thanks very much, Darius.
Thank you.
That is your late news for Thursday. Thank you for joining us tonight. For news at any time, check our website, cbc.ca/BC. Your next local news is on the early edition on CBC Radio 1. Begins tomorrow morning at 5:30. Have a good night.